December 9th, 2017. A Chinese company takes control of a port in Sri Lanka. The terms, a 99-year lease. Signed, done. Headlines follow fast. China's debt trap. Colonial playbook. The port Beijing seized. Every major outlet runs some version of the story. The story is real, it is also almost entirely wrong. Go back 4 years. September 7th, 2013, Astana, Kazakhstan. Xi Jinping stands before a room of Central Asian heads of state. He announces the Silk Road Economic Belt, a plan to finance infrastructure across Central Asia, through the Middle East into Europe. Weeks later, in Jakarta, the maritime version follows. The 21st century maritime Silk Road, land plus sea? The world would call it the Belt and Road Initiative. The offer? China will build what your country needs. No political conditions attached, no elections required, no austerity programs. 149 countries signed on, 2/3 of the world's population. China committed more than $1 trillion. Here is what happened. The World Bank moves slowly. Its loans come attached to conditions, governance reforms, transparency requirements, competitive bidding on contracts. For governments that need a road built now, the process can take years before ground breaks. China's offer was different: fast approvals. No questions about elections or civil liberties, no requirements to restructure your economy before the money arrives. The implicit deal: build first, align later. The need was real. Sub-Saharan Africa faced an infrastructure deficit estimated at $150 billion per year. Across the developing world, ports didn't exist. Roads ended at borders. Landlocked countries paid premium costs just to move goods. Ethiopia is the example, 90 million people. Second most populous country in Africa, landlocked. Roughly 95% of Ethiopia's international trade moved through a single corridor. Djibouti's port, 752 kilometers away over bad roads. China built the railway, the Addis Ababa-Djibouti line, 752 kilometers of track across difficult terrain. Cost approximately $4 billion. China Exim Bank financed 70%. Commercial operations began January 1st, 2018. A landlocked country became land-linked. That was the pitch. The money was already moving. Between 2013 and 2023, China financed construction on 6 continents. The scale is hard to summarize. So here are specifics. Laos, one of the poorest countries in Southeast Asia, landlocked, mountainous, no railway. China built a 414-kilometer line from Vientiane to the Chinese border for $6 billion. It opened December 3rd, 2021. In 3 years, 43 million passengers used it. Freight volume exceeded $2.3 billion in 2024 alone. Kenya, the Mombasa-Nairobi standard gauge railway, 480 kilometers, $3.8 billion. China Exim Bank financed 85%. It opened in 2017. Kenya's largest single infrastructure project in 50 years. Pakistan. The China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, $62 billion committed. Highways, coal plants, a deep-water port at Gwadar on the Arabian Sea, Montenegro, a highway, $944 million for 41 kilometers of mountain road, roughly $23 million per kilometer. That loan equaled approximately 20% of Montenegro's entire GDP. That last one matters because it illustrates the terms. Chinese loans averaged 4.2% interest with repayment periods under 10 years. World Bank concessional loans, 1.25%, repaid over 25 to 40 years. These were not the same product. China was not offering aid, it was offering finance. There was also something in the contracts most borrowers couldn't tell anyone about. AData obtained and analyzed 100 actual Chinese loan agreements. Every contract signed since 2014 contained a confidentiality clause. Borrowers were legally barred from disclosing the terms, sometimes even the existence of the debt. The average recipient government underreported its China-related obligations by 5.8% of GDP. Across all BRI countries, the total hidden from taxpayers and monitors, approximately $385 billion. The railways ran. Ports moved cargo. In Sri Lanka, one port was about to become a political incident. Brahma Chellaney is an Indian strategic analyst at the Center for Policy Research in New Delhi. In January 2017, he published a piece in Project Syndicate. The title, China's Debt Trap Diplomacy. His thesis, China extends large loans to strategically located countries it knows cannot repay. When those countries default, China extracts strategic concessions. Port access, military positioning, political leverage, not charity, trap. Chellaney pointed to the ports, to the railways, to the terms hidden inside the contracts. The infrastructure wasn't the point, the debt was the point. The argument spread fast. In 2018, Vice President Mike Pence cited it in a major foreign policy address. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said, Chinese loans are facilitated with bribes. National Security Advisor John Bolton used the same framing for Africa policy. That year, the US passed the BUILD Act, creating the International Development Finance Corporation. Its purpose, offer developing countries an alternative to Chinese loans. Counter BRI institutionalized. Exhibit A for the entire argument was Sri Lanka. China Exim Bank financed Hambantota port in 2 phases. The port was a project of President Mahinda Rajapaksa, built in his home district. It opened. Fewer than 40 ships used it per year. In December 2017, Sri Lanka's government signed a 99-year lease. China Merchants Port Holdings paid $1.12 billion for a 70% operational stake. The story fit a pattern everyone recognized. Colonial-era powers had used exactly this method: lend, wait, foreclose. The optics were damning. China denied any predatory intent. That argument ran for years. Evidence exists to settle it. The lender and the leaseholder are 2 different organizations. China Exim Bank financed the port construction. China Merchants Port Holdings signed the lease. One is a state bank. The other is a port operating company. This was not a bank for closing on a defaulted loan. The 2 transactions were legally separate. The $1.12 billion from the lease went to Sri Lanka's foreign exchange reserves, not to pay off the Hambantota construction loans. Those loans remain outstanding. Sri Lanka still owes China Exim Bank for the port it leased away. Sri Lanka's 2022 financial collapse had a different cause. At that point, 81% of Sri Lanka's foreign debt was owed to Western creditors, international sovereign bonds purchased by global investors. The government had cut taxes sharply and printed money. It banned chemical fertilizers overnight. Tourism collapsed during COVID. Chinese debt was roughly 10% of the problem. The lease agreement explicitly prohibits military use. No Chinese naval vessels are stationed at Hambantota. On at least one documented occasion, Sri Lanka turned a Chinese naval vessel away from the port. By 2024, Hambantota was processing roughly 700,000 vehicles per month. The port works. Deborah Broughtigam directs the China-Africa Research Initiative at Johns Hopkins SAIS. Her team tracks more than 1,000 Chinese loans to African governments. The conclusion? We have not seen any examples where we would say the Chinese deliberately entangled another country in debt and then used that debt to extract unfair or strategic advantages of some kind, including asset seizures. Ada data examined BRI countries across every region. Documented sovereign asset seizures resulting from BRI debt, 0. The trap never triggered, the debt did. If no assets were seized, why are Zambia, Pakistan, Ethiopia, and Laos all in IMF programs? The answer is simpler than a conspiracy. China lent hard money at commercial rates for infrastructure in countries with fragile finances. Some of those bets failed. That is not a trap. It is the oldest story in development finance. When Malaysia's new government tried to cancel the East Coast rail link in 2018, China negotiated. The original contract, $16 billion. Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad called it overpriced. He was right. China reduced the contract to $11 billion, a 33% cut. Malaysia got its railway. China got a reduced return instead of no return. Montenegro took a $944 million loan for 41 kilometers of highway. In 2021, the government asked the EU for help repaying it. The EU said no. Its message to other Western Balkan countries: we told you not to sign. Montenegro refinanced through Western banks, China got paid, the EU got a cautionary tale to repeat in speeches. Meanwhile, China's own lending was collapsing. In 2016, BRY financing peaked at approximately $75 billion in new annual commitments. By 2019, that figure had fallen to $3.9 billion. A 95% drop in 3 years. The bad loans accumulated faster than the good projects could cover them. By 2023, Xi Jinping was calling for small but beautiful projects. The era of $6 billion railways and $62 billion corridors was over. A-Data's latest research found something that reframes the story. Since 2016, China has deployed $240 billion in emergency rescue loans to 22 countries. China is now spending more keeping old borrowers solvent than building new things. The trap caught both sides. Italy left BRY in December 2023, the first G7 country to exit. Panama followed in February 2025, the first in Latin America. Both departures came under direct US pressure. 149 countries remain. Here is what $1 trillion bought: a railway through Laos that 43 million people have ridden, ports in Ethiopia's trade corridor that cut overland freight costs, roads through Montenegro's mountains that the EU wouldn't finance, bridges, power plants, and fiber cable across 2/3 of the world. Here is what else it bought: $385 billion in debt that borrowing governments couldn't tell their own taxpayers about. Loan terms harder than any multilateral alternative. Tied contracts that kept local workers off their own projects. 35% of BRI infrastructure built with significant implementation problems. The debt trap, as Chellaney described it, was a predatory scheme with asset seizure at the end. That did not happen. 0 times. What did happen is harder to explain and less useful as a slogan. China bet $1 trillion on infrastructure in the developing world. Some of those bets paid off. Others became restructured debts on half-finished railways. The country that lent the money wanted influence. It got some. Countries that borrowed wanted development. They got some. The debt is real. Roads and railways are real. The trap caught everyone. China lent $1 trillion to build infrastructure across the developing world. But the next phase of China's global resource strategy is not happening on land at all. Watch how China is racing 3 miles beneath the Pacific Ocean to claim the battery minerals sitting on the ocean floor, and why the same geopolitical playbook that built BRY is already being deployed on the abyssal plain. Watch the Abyssal War, conquering the 6,000-meter chasm.